Hi, this is Pat Johnson in Psych 150, and in this mini lecture we're going to talk about operant conditioning and the concepts of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. If you get this lecture, you can pretty much say that you understand operant conditioning, because the concept of negative reinforcement is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts in psychology. So pay particular attention to this lecture, go through the examples with me, test yourself on the examples, and hopefully by the end of this lecture, you'll really understand the difference between positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment. Just as a quick reminder from a previous lecture on operant conditioning, reinforcement is any event that strengthens, in other words, increases the behavior it follows. So in reinforcement, we have a behavior. A consequence follows that behavior. And if the behavior increases, in other words, if the behavior goes up, it is reinforcement. On the other hand, punishment is any event that decreases the behavior it follows. So we have a behavior, there's a consequence. If that behavior decreases, if it goes down, we call that punishment. So whether or not something is reinforcement or punishment depends on whether that behavior increased as a result or decreased as a result. Here's B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is the father of operant conditioning. He's thought to be one of the most brilliant men in psychology ever. And here was Skinner's, what has been called a Skinner box. And in the Skinner box, you would have a white rat, and the white rat would be in this little controlled environment. And the behavior that the rat would do would be to press this little bar right here. And in pressing the bar, there would be consequences. And we'll talk about those consequences in just a little bit, but that's the basics of a Skinner box. All right, positive reinforcement. This one's easy. This is a concept that most of you understand. And when I say positive, I don't want you to think good, because what's good to one person may not be good to another person. But think of positive as a plus sign, because in positive reinforcement, a stimulus is added after response, and the response rate increases. So think of positive as a plus sign, and we know that in reinforcement, behavior increases. So a stimulus is added after response, and the response rate increases or is more likely to occur. So here's our student, and this is what I actually do in my seated class. I say to the class, who wants some candy? And students raise their hands, and I run over to a student and I hand them a piece of candy. And then I say, who wants some candy? And student raises their hand and they get candy. And pretty soon I have students sitting there raising their hand over and over and over again to get more and more candy. Their behavior is increasing because candy has been added. Here's some examples of positive reinforcement. You go to work, you get paid, you keep going to work. So getting paid is added, and going to work, that behavior increases. It's positive reinforcement. Let's suppose you're gambling and you play slots. You get a big payout. So a big payout has been added, and you keep playing. So positive reinforcement. Something is added and the behavior increases. Your dog does a trick. He gets a treat, and he does the trick again. So in this case, the dog treat has been added, and the behavior of doing the trick increases. All right, here's the hard one, negative reinforcement. In negative reinforcement, don't think of negative as something bad. Think of negative as a minus sign. Something is being removed. And it's reinforcement. And what do we know about reinforcement? In reinforcement, behavior increases. And this is where a lot of students get mixed up. They see the word negative and they think, ooh, it's negative, so the behavior decreases. No, no. In negative reinforcement, the behavior increases. It has to. It's reinforcement because something is taken away. And let me give you an example. First, let's see. A stimulus is removed after response and the response rate increases or is more likely to occur. So again, here's what I do in my classroom. It's the same behavior. It's hand-raising behavior. And what I do is I say to the class, what was the behavior that got you the candy? And they said raising their hand. And I say to them, okay, that same behavior of hand raising is going to make me stop. And they look at me really perplexed. And then I let out the most awful screech, and I can do it really loud, and I'm not going to do it into my microphone. But it's a real high, but it's more like at 100 decibels. And I do that, and I hold it, and they raise their hand because it removes my screeching. My screeching is taken away. And then I will often have a student sit there with their hand raised in the back of the classroom to keep me from ever making that noise again. So a stimulus is removed, my screeching is taken away, and their hand raising increases. If it helps you, think of positive reinforcement as getting a reward, and think of negative reinforcement as doing something to avoid something unpleasant. But again, I hesitate to give you those words because what is good for one person may not be good for another person. But when you see something where a person is doing a behavior to avoid something, like you clean your bedroom to avoid having your cell phone taken away, that's negative reinforcement. The behavior is increasing because something is taken away. Here are some examples of negative reinforcement. You start driving, the seatbelt alarm goes off, you put on the seatbelt because it removes the noise of the seatbelt alarm. So you're putting on your seatbelt is increasing, that behavior is increasing because something has been removed. In this case, what's been removed is the sound of the seatbelt alarm. You get a headache, you take some aspirin. The aspirin removes the headache. There shouldn't be a comma there. And next time you get a headache, you take aspirin again. So taking aspirin increases because it removes the pain of the headache. And here's an example from boot camp. A drill instructor yells at recruits. Recruits do a particular behavior faster and with better accuracy, and the drill instructor stops yelling at them, at least for that particular behavior. Overall, drill instructors never stop yelling. But here again, the behavior of doing that particular behavior correctly is increasing because the yelling of the drill instructor has been removed. All right, so let's go back to our Skinner box. In the Skinner box, when the rat presses the bar, he gets rat chow. Here's the pellet dispenser, and here's the dispenser tube, and little pellets of rat chow come out. So the rat presses the bar, he gets rat chow, he presses the bar again and again and again. In this case, that's positive reinforcement. The behavior is increasing because rat chow is being added. But if you look down here, and it's just out of view, there's an electric grid here. In this case, the rat presses the bar to remove the small electric shock. So again, his bar pressing is increasing because it avoids getting shocked. That would be negative reinforcement. Behavior increases because it removes something unpleasant. Remember, in both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, the behavior increases. And from our discussion in a previous operant conditioning discussion, remember that in punishment, the behavior decreases. So we can have positive reinforcement, we can have negative reinforcement, and by the way, we can also have positive punishment and negative punishment. We're not going to go into that big of detail because that would be for a semester-long class in learning theory, but do know that both positive punishment and negative punishment exist. We're just not going to go into that detail. Positive punishment would be, let me give you an example. Something happens and your behavior decreases. So in other words, you swat your 3-year-old on the butt, something is added, and let's say he stops touching the hot stove, or he stops throwing a tantrum. In negative punishment, something is taken away and the behavior decreases. So the teenager curses, the allowance is taken away, the cursing behavior decreases. That would be negative punishment. Don't worry about that, though, for this course. We're not going to get into that great of detail. Just know the difference between positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and in general, in punishment, the behavior decreases. All right, so let's go through some examples. Identify whether each question is an example of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, or punishment. And these are examples that you would see on your test. Sally, age 2, said dinner for the first time. Her mother laughed and patted her on the head. Sally said dinner 25 times the next day. So, first of all, ask yourself, is Sally saying dinner increasing or decreasing? Well, it's increasing. She said it 25 times the next day, so it's increasing. Has something been added or removed? Well, her mother laughed and patted her on the head. That's been added, and her behavior increases. Well, that looks like positive reinforcement. Let's check. Yep, it's positive reinforcement. Something has been added and the behavior increases. All right, next question. On Monday, Sylvia slammed the screen door 3 out of 8 times she left the house. Each time her mother would scream, "Sylvia, I've told you until I'm blue in the face, don't slam the screen door." On Tuesday, Sylvia slammed the screen door 7 out of 8 times. Now, her mother's yelling, but don't look at it on the surface. Examine this like it's a math problem. First of all, ask yourself, is her behavior increasing or decreasing? Well, on Tuesday she slammed the screen door 7 out of 8 times, so her behavior is increasing. Is something being added or is something being removed? Something's being added. Her mother's screaming. So, added and increase is positive reinforcement. And you're sitting there going, well, that doesn't look like positive reinforcement on the surface. That's exactly why I threw this question in here, to show you that just because something may look like punishment doesn't mean it is. If it's actually something's being added and the behavior increases, it's positive reinforcement. And all I have to ask you is, did you ever do anything just to get a rise out of an adult when you were a kid? And we all did. So it's positive reinforcement. All right, here's another one. Mary has learned to take her migraine medication as soon as she experiences a migraine headache coming on. The medication removes the pain of the headache. Well, this is similar to the aspirin question we saw earlier. Something is increasing. Mary's taking her medication more and more because pain is being removed. This is negative reinforcement. Something's being removed and the behavior increases. Last question. Whenever Jacob gave an answer in math class, his teacher ridiculed him in front of his classmates. Soon Jacob stopped giving answers in math class. What's happening to Jacob's behavior? It is decreasing. And again, we're not going into detail as whether this is positive or negative punishment. When behavior decreases, just know it's punishment. So there you have it. You might want to go through this lecture a couple times. Reinforcement increases behavior, punishment decreases behavior. To have positive reinforcement, something is added and the behavior increases. When it's negative reinforcement, something is removed and the behavior increases. In punishment, the behavior decreases.